I'd just like to begin with a blessing. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Sabayot. And that's a blessing in God's language of light. It's the language of creation. It's a blessing used by the Brotherhoods of Light. And when we use it, it helps create a beautiful, clear energy field of connectedness, of clear light, so that we really feel that we are coming from the heart and from all one. I will talk a little bit more about that perhaps on the next mini seminar to explain how it works and how you too can use it. But today I invite you to hitch another ride with me, as it were, on our shared soul journey. And to start with, I'd like to just recap a little on the first section of the series, the first little mini seminar. We started off last time, I explained why I have called this the 3 spiritual R's. So just to refresh our memories, just as a child we need to learn the 3 R's as a basis for everything else that we learn afterwards on our journey to becoming adult. And so it is with our spiritual journey. We need the 3 basic understandings of what makes us up, what makes us tick, shall we say, who we really are at a very subtle level. Because when we can understand that and understand ourselves a lot better and a lot deeper, then of course everything else fits in and makes much more sense. And of course we are much more empowered when we're coming from this deeper understanding and deeper knowledge and deeper connection. So I've just used that as an analogy, the 3 spiritual R's, for the 3 main aspects of being while we're here in this 3rd dimension. And the first R is short for the real you, and that's just a term I've used or created, if you will, to explain our divine counterpart, who we truly, authentically are in the higher frequencies, the spiritual us. It has many names: the higher self, the God self, I am presence, overself, body of light, super consciousness. It doesn't matter. You can use whichever one of those you feel comfortable with. But that's our true self, our divine counterpart, if you will. And it's also our source. That's where we came from, or emanated from. And I'll come back to this in a moment. It's our destination of what we're returning to. And the second R was the responsible you. And that's just a way of saying the soul, because it is our soul, and that's the subject of today's little discussion. The soul is responsible for the life that we're experiencing right now, and each of the lives that we have in the past experienced. And I'll explain that a little bit more in detail shortly. And the third R is what I've called the reflection you, or reflective you, because that is a way of summarizing the fact that we are human expressions of the divine, or as the saying goes, we're divine beings having a human experience. So I've also likened this to going on a journey, and in fact that's what we're doing. We're journeying from life to life, and in this life we're doing a journey even just on the basic level from birth through to death. But we're also, as we go, on a soul journey, a spiritual journey. And as with every journey, there are 3 main components. We have to know the destination. If we don't, just think about it. Say you went into a travel agent and said, I'd like a ticket, please. And they say, okay, where to? And you say, I don't know, just give me a ticket. Well, of course, you won't be going very far, very fast. And it's a little bit like that with our soul journey. If you don't know your destination, if you don't really understand it and can integrate it into your living, then we too tend to go around in circles, or we go down chasing dead ends, and so forth. So having a clear destination, which, as I say, is reunification with your higher God self, the source, as it were, of our experiences here, then having that in mind, we have a clear focus. But as with every other journey, it's very useful to have a map, because that way we can save time, we can take a direct route if we choose, and we don't have to waste time going round and round or down little dead-end avenues. And the third aspect that helps on any journey is having signposts. And both the map and the signposts come under the category of today's discussion, because it's the soul that can give us both of those. So I'll be explaining that very shortly. And as Diane said, if you did miss my first mini seminar, I do strongly recommend you go to the replay, because that way you'll understand the analogies I'm using, the terminology, and it'll be as though we're on the same page, as it were. Now, if you did tune in, you will remember hearing me say that spirituality is not just to be talked about and read about. And in past lifetimes, even in this lifetime, many people spend a lot of time reading, studying, talking about it, which is fine because it gives us knowledge and it gives us foundation to work from. But until you start living it, putting everything into practice, it still remains just theoretical. So the soul is responsible for this actually living, because our lives actually are guided by our soul. So that's why it's so important to have an understanding of what the soul is, what it does, and how we can work with it, communicate with it, and so forth. Why is it called, in my little analogy, the responsible self? Well, it's responsible for the conditions of this life that we're in. It's responsible for the parents, the family that you've chosen to come into, for the culture, the timing, and for the different circumstances, the obstacles, the challenges, the relationships that come along the way. Why? It's because they give us the opportunity to grow. I think we all know that. Unfortunately, humans have this tendency to make more progress when we're up against something. And the soul will create or attract certain conditions and circumstances and relationships, whatever it is that will give us the opportunity to find out what's going on underneath. Because it's not the outer experience or the outer appearance that's important. It's what is it telling us? What is the lesson behind it? And this is what the soul is trying to get our attention to uncover and find out, because then we have the power to do something about it. Otherwise, what happens? Well, we're likely to have similar experiences, similar relationship problems, or whatever it may be, again and again. So in each of these little seminars, I'll just explain the format in case you weren't with us last time. The first part is talking about the subject, the topic, so that we do have a bit of an understanding, a foundation, if you will. Secondly, it's about how does it affect us? How does it apply to us in everyday life? In other words, what is its relevance? Because without knowing this connection, this relevance, again, it's all still theory. And the third little part of each mini seminar, I'll give you tools or techniques that you can actually go and try out for yourself. So let's look at the first part. What's the origin of the soul? Well, to go back to what we discussed last time, if our higher self or our I am over self is our source, because that was emanated from the I am that I am, the Godhead, this higher divine counterpart that each one of us has is, to use our terminology, which is obviously limited to some degree, it's on a higher frequency, a higher dimension. And so, as such, it doesn't come into this third dimension at all. but we still, of course, are part of it, and we need that connection. So in order for us to come into the third dimensional experience, it projected a reflection of itself, if you like, a lower counterpart, which we call the soul, which is then able to journey with us through lifetime after lifetime. And so that gives us an understanding of the connection, and at the same time helps us understand what we're working to achieve. Well, so what else does the soul do? Well, it records every experience, or the essence of every experience from every lifetime. Not necessarily each separate experience, but the essence of it. In other words, what did we learn from it? What did we gain from it? And of course, it also records the karma that we have created, knowingly or unknowingly, and this is recorded as what's known as the Akashic Records. And it can be very helpful at times to tap into that, to help explain perhaps relationship challenge, or particular reactions that you may have that don't seem to add up with the rest of your personality and your character. And when I do one-on-one consultations, normally we go into the Akashic Records to find answers to some of these questions. And as I mentioned just now, it's the soul who sets up the conditions. It's not like a destiny that everything is set in stone, because we still have free will, of course, but the most conducive circumstances and conditions and relationships to start off with. I have a little picture. I like to work in pictures when I teach, and I've got this picture that in between incarnations, when we are getting ready for another life experience here in the physical, in the third dimension, I like to think of it as having getting together as a round table, as it were. And we have the soul and your higher self, or I am presence, and the lords of karma. And so between these aspects, we discuss, well, in the next incarnation, what is it I would like to address? What things would I like to handle? Would I like to build on? Would I like to heal or forgive or let go, and so forth? And so then from that decision, as I said earlier, we choose then the relationships that we come into through family that will give us a chance to work those karmic connections out. And don't forget, of course, we've got good karma too. So sometimes, and hopefully more often, they will be very harmonious and pleasant. So this is why, as my understanding, that the different conditions and the circumstances that we get led into, or we create, or we attract, are from this soul overview, as it were, the higher aspect of why we've come into each lifetime. So it gives us our real purpose for being. Now, to my understanding, soul purpose is different from life purpose. Being a numerologist for 40 or so years, I like to separate the two, because then you can get a deeper understanding. And by that I mean the soul purpose is what I've just discussed, that you decide with your round table before incarnating. What are the real issues that you want to work on? Whereas a life purpose is, how do you want to express it? How do you want to experience? So a life purpose encompasses careers, talents that we develop, families and so forth that we create, and so on. So that gives us a little understanding of what the soul does and where it comes from. But let's go a little bit deeper, and I'd like to share with you just a little bit of some of the ancient wisdom regarding the soul, and the ancient wisdom teachings that I've been working with now for 40 or so years. Work on what we call the Western lineage tradition, going back to the time of Abraham. And It's known as various names, of course, but it's the mystery school teachings from that lineage, the Kabbalistic teachings, the universal tree of life, and so forth. But of course, it encompasses much more than that. And when I first came across this too, I thought, that gives me an understanding now of what's going on and of the conditions that we, as humanity in general, find ourselves in down here. And that's because in this understanding, it's just a way of defining it basically. The soul is tripartite. That means it has three aspects or three parts. And the first part is known by the common term of the divine spark. I think most people like to use that term. It's easy to understand. And what is the divine spark? Well, as I understand it, or as I'd like to explain it, it is that aspect of your source self, your higher self, your I am God self, that is carried as a link and as the animating force within the soul and therefore into your life experience. And for most of humanity, of course, who are still, let's say, sleepwalking, then they've not they're not ready to look at their real self, their highest self, their divine self, their spiritual self. And so you could say they're sleepwalking in a sense and creating what I like to call soap operas for each life that seem to have ups and downs, but no particular reason. The plot just simply goes on and on and on. But for those of us, and I'm sure if you are joining me today, we are probably older souls in the sense that we've done countless incarnations before, and we've possibly come to some kind of point where we're saying, well, okay, but isn't enough enough? Surely this doesn't go on for infinity. What is the real purpose? And when I can find and start clarifying it for myself, then let's get on with it. Let's start what the ancient wisdom calls the return journey home, the return journey back to source, which in the next phase, shall we say, from earth plane, is reunification of our soul with our higher I am over self light body, which then means once we're able to do that, we can move into the fifth dimension and move on from there. And the beauty of this is, as I understand it, and we've got plenty of evidence to back this up through the lives of ascended masters and Jesus and so forth, is that once we've reached that level that we can reunite or ascend our soul, and it's no longer needed as a separate entity, shall we say, then we have choice. And to me, that's a wonderful thought. So instead of having to come back into physical incarnation because of all the unfinished, what I call unfinished soul business, all the unfinished karma and so forth, which actually energetically act like extremely powerful energetic cords that tether us to the third dimensional earth plane, and therefore will keep bringing us back until we have cleared that tethering, cleared those cords. And this is part of this soul journey, this soul purification, it's often called, because until we have worked through those, then, as I say, we will have to come back. But once we've cleared them, and again in the ancient wisdom teachings, it's often called soul purification, which is done by means of soul education. In other words, we are able to listen and pick up the hints and the knowledge from the soul and the higher self. This is what I'm sure we're working on now, you and I. Once we can start tuning into that, then of course we can start taking a more direct route and accelerating our progress. However, again, looking at the Ascended Masters as our elder brothers, if you like, and sisters who've gone before, once we've achieved that level, we have the choice. We can move on to a higher consciousness experience, which at this point, of course, we don't have terms for, or we may choose to come back, like the Ascended Masters have done at different times, in service to our brothers and sisters still on the earth plane. But the big difference is that from that point on, when we do come back, we will have full awareness, not like now and all the previous lifetimes we've had. Each time we have come back in and we have completely forgotten, at the beginning anyway, of our previous learnings, our previous existences, and karma and so forth. In other words, we drank the cup of forgetfulness, as it's put in the Pistis Sophia scrolls of the Nag Hammadi scrolls, which record Jesus's very advanced teachings that he came back after he died and was resurrected. He came back to teach the disciples, so they too had the broader foundation of understanding and could carry on the work that he had started. And he was a high priest of the order of Melchizedek, and so he restored that order which had started at the time of Abraham. And now is the prophesied time for this influence, this consciousness to come back more and more profoundly to help humanity forward, basically, because the order of Melchizedek is in charge of humanity's overall spiritual growth and evolution. So this divine spark, to return to that aspect of soul, until we do start waking up, shall we say, and consciously saying, yes, I want to now be conscious of my return journey home and do as much as I can in this lifetime to move forward on it, then this divine spark, which again using a picture, to me is like a little pilot light, until we, as I say, wake up and decide, okay, now's the time to do something about it, and it has to be a conscious choice, of course. Then this spark starts expanding into, as it were, a flame. And eventually, the goal of this is that this inner light, so powerful and so strong, and grows within us, so that it can then transmute all the lower aspects of being and the lower aspects of soul. In other words, it purifies the soul. The analogy to that, of course, is fire as we know it in the physical sense, which is used to purify. Of course, this fire, this spark, is not of that kind of fire, but it's a spark of light, of intense, pure, clear light of divine creation. So that's Neshama, that is the highest part of the soul. Then we have Ruach, it's called, it doesn't matter with the names. Ruach gives us the capabilities as human beings of tapping into our higher mind, the higher mind of our higher self, which in turn is connected to divine mind. And it gives us the powers of thought, again, higher thought. Not just only the mundane, which of course we need while we're in a physical body. It gives us the means to understand. It gives us the power of reasoning, higher reasoning powers. And it gives us reflection, the power of reflection, becoming self-aware, being able to think in abstract thought, which are aspects, of course, that humans have and the other animals of the animal kingdom don't have. So how we use these powers is part of our development. Do we tap into the higher aspects, or do we still work on the lower, shall we say, natural or instinctual aspects of our animal body? And that is the third part of the soul, the animal body. Because physically, I believe we're about 98% have the same genetic makeup as many other species. But these are the other aspects of soul that give us the humanity, the human uniqueness. So the animal part of us, of course, functions on an instinctual level. We have the normal survival instinct, fight or flight syndrome, the procreative instinct, and the sort of the lower intuition, the sensing that both we and animals have. So we need it while we're in, obviously, a physical body. And the physical body that we created, shall we say, from the soul aspect is suitable for housing the soul and for us to have these journeys, and gives us the chance to make more progress than would otherwise be possible. Okay, so the next part of my little discussion with you is, okay, it's great to have some understandings, and perhaps I've added a few thoughts for you to include into your knowledge base, but how is it relevant? In other words, if it isn't relevant to us in this 3D life, living our spirituality, then it's, again, still theoretical. So as I mentioned before, it gives us now an understanding of our real soul purpose, what we've chosen to handle this time. And I like to often call it unfinished soul business, which includes, of course, karma. It also, as I've mentioned, gives us a map of our territory that we're traversing on our return journey back now. It gives us an understanding of these are the obstacles on this part of the journey. Looking beyond it, now I can understand what that's for. And so once we have understanding, remember, higher understanding of the soul, then we can make progress and handle the issue from the causative or the causal level, the real cause, rather than just handling only the effects, or just handling obstacles and challenges to the best of our ability, but not actually clearing them. That's the difference of the soul journey, is clearing the actual causes, so that we don't have to recreate or attract again similar circumstances with the same message, the same lesson. And it also gives us this understanding of what we're heading for, what it is that we're aiming to do. And you can simply say soul ascension or purification of the soul. It doesn't matter the terminology again, but we do now have an understanding, and we can choose which route we wish to take. The direct route, or do we still want to wander all the highways and byways of life experiences? And you can do that for as many lifetimes more as you wish. There is no necessity to handle it now or at any particular time. That's our free will choice. But maybe like me, you got to the point, well, okay, I want to start moving forward instead of going in circles. And how many more lifetimes do you want to spend? That's what it came down to when I made this decision a few decades ago. So let me go on to the last part of today's discussion, and that is, what are some of the techniques that we can use? How can we know the soul is communicating with us, and how can we communicate consciously with our soul? Okay, again, it falls into sort of three broad categories. We receive communication from the soul. We can ask directly for answers and to our questions, and we can also decree. So let's have a look at those. Okay, soul guidance. How does our soul try and get our attention? Well, first of all, in my experience, we seem to get little niggles. Now, what I call a soul niggle is something catches your attention, a word maybe, or something someone says or you read, a phrase, a concept, and you sort of think it registers at some deep level, and you think that's important somehow. Maybe I'll get back to it. Maybe I'll go and investigate that, or study it, or research it. But these little niggles usually are quite faint. It's like a recognition from within that this keyword or that concept is important to you personally. I know when I first heard the name of Melchizedek way back in the 80s, it was like, whoa, an electric current almost went through me, and I knew that that was something I needed to delve into and to understand. And of course, that's the basis of my work now. So then there's the more insistent version, shall we say, which I like to call soul nudges. And that can be when something keeps coming back into your attention. You keep hearing or coming up against the same thing over and over. It's like someone's just tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, take note. This is very important for you to look into, to understand, because it's going to help you progress. It's going to help move you forward. And these soul nudges can come in any form at all, via other people, via books, via keywords, via seminars you go to, by what I call light bulb moments, ahas, something suddenly clicks in your mind and you think, of course, now I need to put those things together a little more clearly because there's something very important there for me. Those are what I call soul nudges. And of course, recurring circumstances, challenges, obstacles, things that come back maybe with a different form, but underneath have the same lesson. So these are some of the ways the soul nudges you to try and wake you up. You know, when someone's dozing, you give them a little nudge. And believe you me, and I can vouch for this from my own experience and many others too, when the soul gets a little insistent because this is what you've come to do, you chose to come to handle whatever it may be in this life, and at the moment you're not looking at it or you're not aware of it, and so the nudges get more insistent. And if you don't actually start thinking and noticing them, you are setting yourself up perhaps to attract what I call a cosmic 4x2. And believe you me, they're not very pleasant. It's like the soul is saying, wake up, got to get your attention somehow. And for me personally, I had one of those about 50 years ago now, in the form of a serious road accident, which literally stopped me in my tracks, because that often is what a cosmic 4x2 will do in some way. And for me, I was going down a path which, although I enjoyed, which was teaching, dancing and choreographing for local shows and so on 7 days a week, was not actually what I came into this life to do from my sole purpose. And so in those days, when you broke your back and had to have a fusion or a graft, the treatment was to lie motionless in hospital on your back for 4 months. And believe you me, you do a lot of reflection. You have much else you can do. And so at that time, it changed my life direction, and that's what a cosmic 4x2 often does. For me, I realized that I needed to end an engagement because it wasn't good for my partner, my fiance, or myself, and I eventually moved out of the career that I was following to the exclusion of all else. So rather than attract something like that of your own kind, and of course it won't be just that way, that was the way I particularly created it, and teaching dancing, what better way to stop you in tracks than to be flat on your back for 4 months. So do take note when you get these little feelings, these little ahas, or these little, oh, I've thought of that, or I've noticed that again, because they're pointing you, they're a signpost. What I said earlier, they're like signposts that are pointing you in the right direction. Okay, so that's the receiving, and now the asking. Okay, we can ask our soul directly for help and answers. And let's face it, if you don't ask a question, how will you receive an answer? And of course, asking a question that's really clearly thought out, rather than a vague one, is going to have a clear answer. A vague question will have a vague answer. So when something's puzzling you, and it can be, again, any area of your life that you feel is important, maybe trying to understand a relationship that's really challenging, or maybe a reaction that comes from yourself involuntarily, because it's often based on a past life experience in your Akashic Records in your soul that's creating this reaction. It's not one to do with this lifetime per se. answers to anything, then in your quiet time, in your meditation time, ask directly to have it brought, this is the way I do it, bring to my conscious awareness, please, what's behind or what's underneath, and then explain what it is, or what is it here for me to understand or to learn from? What's the lesson in this? And then be patient, because the soul will answer. It may not be straight away. And again, be aware, answers can come in any form. It may not be even in a meditation time, and it certainly won't be with a clap of thunder and a booming voice saying this is the answer. I'm afraid that doesn't happen, at least as far as I'm aware. But it can come subtly. Someone may say something again. It's like the answers come on a universal notice board, and the answer can be there in all sorts of forms. So just know and be quite certain, once the question has been put, the answer will come. Why? Okay, the reason is because we are all part of the quantum source field. And when you ask a question, you're forming a focus of energy, an intention. And as soon as you do that, a clear intention, you are creating a new wave of energy. And this energy, wave of energy, then goes out into the quantum field, because we are transmitters as well as receivers. And by the nature of the fact that we are all part of this field, if you keep that focus and attention, it will boomerang back in whatever form is appropriate, be it an inner answer, as I mentioned, or in form if it's something that you want in form. So these are the quantum mechanics and the quantum physics behind what's going on. But we are part of this one quantum field, this quantum mind. It has many other terminologies. 0 point field, it doesn't matter. But like the boomerang, it will come back. And the other aspect of asking can be, and I use this from time to time when I've finished a whole series of projects perhaps, what is my next most perfect step? And it can be on your own journeying, or if you're wanting to know, as I often do, what's my next most perfect step in my soul service mission? In other words, what I'm doing in service. So that's those are ways that you can actually specifically ask. And then lastly are the decrees. Now, a decree and an affirmation are not the same. An affirmation is where you're affirming something, but it still leaves a little room for the possibility of doubt or that it will not be accomplished. A decree comes from a higher power, the highest part of you, that says, I know that this is on the higher level in the quantum field now already accomplished. You could say it's a little bit like a command, but not in an arrogant way. And for me, I will share you how I use a decree. You can use your own terminology, but the principle is the same. Remember, what is the source of your power? It's your divine counterpart, your God self, your higher I am presence. And so I suggest you start the decree something along the lines of, by the power of my I am over self, I decree, and then finish it in whatever way that you wish. And it can be that you want to decree that the answer comes to you in a very clear way that you cannot possibly mistake, because sometimes even with the best of intentions, life gets in the way and it can become a little unclear. So use that decree on something that's really relevant, that's life-changing, that you really want to understand or want to know. It's not meant like you wouldn't say, I decree for a cup of tea or something like that. It's going to be something that's really deep and meaningful, as the expression goes. So I hope some of these understandings and techniques will give you some food for thought. And do please, if you would like to email me with any of your successes, because they can be fairly instant in this time of high frequency now, this consciousness shift, things do seem to come into action a lot quicker than they did in the past. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me on sjv3@extra.co.nz, or if you can't remember it, go to my website where the contact heading is there, and the website is simply www.ominternational, that's ominternational.nz or .co.nz. They both reach the same thing, because I do love to hear how people are putting some of these into practice and getting some amazing, wonderful results. And so thank you for joining me, and I do hope you'll join me in the next of these mini seminars. And the topic for next time is activating your hotline to your God self, because it is as though we do have a hotline, and I'll be able to share with you how it works, how you can use it more effectively. So I look forward to your company, and thank you for being with us today. And thank you, Diane.